Good afternoon, and welcome to the Voice of Wisdom. With over 60 years of experience as an investment banker, entrepreneur, investment analyst, economist, and venture capitalist, Morty Davis is Wall Street and capitalism personified. The over 400 companies for which he has raised more than $3 billion over the years have created a countless number of jobs and exciting new products. Through the Voice of Wisdom, Mr. Davis explores, analyzes, and debates the most topical political, economic, and social issues facing our world today. Joining Mr. Davis today for a discussion on political privilege and the debt ceiling is Ephraim Lowy. And now, Mr. Davis and Mr. Lowy.
Hello again. It's great to be back with you all. My listeners, the group that has real wisdom. I always enjoy the messages you send me, the notes you send me. Even when you disagree with me, they're very wise, they're very well supported, and they teach me things that I never thought or recognized. So thank you all for being part of this audience that tunes in every Wednesday, and God bless you all. I'm delighted to have Mr. Lowy here today. He's a genius. He came in his tennis outfit, so I really appreciate that, right off the tennis court.
We can do battle. Verbal tennis.
Yeah. I was an avid tennis player before the pandemic, and I took a break, and now it's hard for me to get back. Anyway...
You'll still beat me.
Not if I can't keep my balance. Anyway, we're in for an exciting discussion, I believe, because we're talking about the privileges that our political representatives, including the Supreme Court, the Congress, the President, enjoy, even though we're told that we're all equal under the law. That's obviously not true, and you'll see why when I enumerate the various privileges and literally breaking of the law that these representatives of ours are entitled to. So we can get started because let me suggest a couple. The members of the Congress, both the Senate and the House, are allowed to buy stocks and companies that have inside in which they learn inside information. For example, if they just had a meeting and they decided to give Boeing or Northrop, leading defense companies, a $5 billion contract, which is going to push up the stock the minute they announce it, they're allowed to buy it as they learn about it. No, the whole world doesn't know, only the insiders at the Congress know. And then it shoots up and they're allowed to sell it the next day after the announcement, or they can keep it, but they've had the opportunity to buy it from somebody who didn't have this information, and they're allowed to enjoy profits that other people that do this, anybody else outside of Congress that does this, is locked up in jail, is found violating the law. In the case of the Supreme Court, we just realized that Justice Thomas, took millions and millions of dollars of presents from a wealthy, what was his name? Harlan Crow. Crow. He took trips on his yacht. He took flights, millions of dollars, and didn't even report it, much less turn it down or and Crow brings things, issues before the Supreme Court that Thomas has to judge on. And even the head of the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, has taken issue with the fact that, well, we make our own rules and we do have an ethics code. So that's just one of the privileges. That there's a lot more think about, and I'll convey to you during the course of this program. So, how do you feel about that, Ephraim?
You raised a lot of good points, and I'm assuming you're of the opinion that these are unethical and they should not have these privileges.
Absolutely. Why should another citizen
I
that learns of information before others do, has access to some friend at the company or something, and buys a stock, and if he's found out, if he's discovered to have done that, is indicted and put in jail?
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement on that. Certainly, it's not just that they can profit, right? It's also that they're now incentivized to give the contract to almost the worst company that will have the biggest stock price appreciation, right?
That's if they already own the stock.
Or they could buy it.
No,
So
it doesn't have to be. It could be any company.
Yeah, look, when in any system, you want to get rid of as many perverse incentives as you have.
Right.
And this, I have no idea why this loophole exists, that members of Congress are exempt from insider trading. This is a no-brainer to the point where I'm not even sure. I couldn't even make the case for the other side on this one. On the Supreme Court issue, yeah, absolutely. Nobody should be taking money from a potential bribe, right? No justice should ever be getting money from someone who they have to rule about. In the Torah, that's expressly forbidden. The Talmud actually goes to great lengths that even, even offering a judge a ride or help in any way, or even the minus detail of how you could be of benefit to a judge invalidates that judge from adjudicating your case. So certainly the example you said would be egregious. I think the biggest point with all of this should be just full transparency, right? So like you said, had he reported it, and we could somehow quantify what he got and how he got it, like, I don't think we have to make sure no Supreme Court justice ever gets on any boat or plane or gets anything gratuitous. I'm not, like, remember when they went after Bibi for $10,000 of furniture? Like, come on, let's be real. But certainly anything meaningful, yeah, it should be reported. And the transparency itself is the checks and balances. So I'm not sure exactly how to get this done, but these particular privileges that you've mentioned so far, absolutely no. It's not just that they shouldn't have these privileges, right? It's almost like inviting bad behavior, right? Like,
well, they would argue there's got to be some inducement for them to do public service, so they should have this special privilege.
Yeah, so up to salary.
But no, yeah, up to salary. Do something, but don't do something that other people, everybody's supposed to be equal under the law, and clearly they're not. And Nancy Pelosi is supposedly one of the major violators of this, or users of this. She owns many stocks where she's on committees that she learns exactly what they're going to do and then buys the stock.
Yeah, this is egregious. And I would, one of the things we agree on most in this podcast, I think we're both not particular fans of the previous president. But the Hunter Biden story, if it's true, and again, I don't have any information, but the fact that he may have gotten payments from foreign countries, that's huge, right? Like, our elected officials should be working on our behalf, not on their behalf, right? And any incentive for them to do something that doesn't serve the public, so any money coming from a foreign national, from a specific company, from an insider trade, is a disaster. It's a perverse incentive, right? Charlie Munger always says, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome.
Follow the money. Right?
Follow the money. So there's I could see some privileges, like on the note you passed me beforehand, I see like some certain exemptions from libel or slander. I could see how maybe we should have tougher standards for them. They should be allowed certain privileges that align with helping them do their job. But this is the opposite, right? This is literally allowing them to put their personal interests ahead of the American people. And why should we make it hard for them to be good, right? Why make, like, politicians have a hard enough time being good, decent people. Let's not make it harder for them, right? And you
It's
just
not
have more
harder.
trouble.
It's all they do is like everybody else. If you think complying with the law is hard, then all our citizens, every one of us, is a victim of that torture. You know, a libel and defamation, a speech by congressmen is immune.
Yeah, so
But maybe there's some logic to that because they speak a lot. If you speak enough, sometimes you could say things. But why they should have the ability without being sued if they ruin somebody's life and ruin his reputation by making a speech that's
yeah, absolutely. And like I said, maybe there should be a higher standard of malicious intent that you have to prove, but they shouldn't be completely exempt, right? If they know what they're doing. Look, one of the biggest problems facing society right now is nobody trusts anything, right? And nobody trusts the news, nobody trusts the media, nobody trusts the FDA, nobody trusts Fauci, and part of this is perfectly deserved on behalf of the institutions. They've not been good fiduciaries of the trust we've given them in the past, right?
well, Thomas argues that Crow, this multi-billionaire, is a long-time good friend. And all of that is because it's not to influence him, but his judgment. Incidentally, Thomas's wife has received enormous amounts of funds.
Well, let me ask you this.
Directly or
Do any of his
directly-
other friends that aren't on the Supreme Court get millions of dollars of gifts? Does
Well-
he just hand out millions of dollars
well,
of gifts to all his friends?
I told you the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, what's his name? Roberts. Defending the fact that he didn't even report it, much less refuse it.
So sorry, just for our listeners and for me too, could you just, what exactly happened? Thomas received millions of dollars in gifts from this guy Crow, and Chief Justice Roberts is supporting Thomas?
There's two problems. One, which is certainly something that he should have done, is report it. If it's clean and right, you're supposed to report any potential conflict. Because the Crow has brought up issues before the Supreme Court. He never recused himself from judging Crow's issues, and he's also provided, his yacht to go around the world, airplane rides. He sold. Thomas sold his house to Crow, and his mother lives in those houses after he sold it to Crow. Thomas's mother does live there. So there's clearly, if not an absolute violation, you're supposed to avoid even the impression of and he certainly didn't do that. And his wife was very active, a denier of the Biden victory, saying she's one of the strongest supporters for Trump having won the election in 2020. But she's received tons of money directly and through some organization that she leads. So And Roberts has said, well, we do have a code of ethics because there's a agitation on the part of many people, many citizens, that we shouldn't have, just as we have for congressmen and senators, and even the president, rules of ethics that they have to comply with. And here he didn't even report it much. If he felt it was okay, it was just
Right.
friendship, then you report it. My friend gave me this ride, that, you know.
Yeah, look, it's not the concept of privilege that I think is wrong, right? We could give them privileges. It's just aligning those privileges with them doing better for the American people, right? So pay them even more, so they're not looking for kickbacks, right? I don't know, have them graded by their constituents, right? But everyone else gets their job approval rating, right?
Right.
Like you get your review at the end of the year, right? Why shouldn't they have their review?
Well, you're raising another issue that's relevant to this discussion. Should Congress be the ones that vote for their own salary increases? They can just get up, and one congressman could propose it, and they can vote for it, and they can vote themselves a raise.
Well,
Is that the appropriate approach? There's no other industry that I'm aware of where the employee decides if he should get a vote, or the group of employees or the unions decide unilaterally.
well, let's examine it, right? It has
I don't
actually
know
has
who
not
else
been.
would do. I don't know who else would be proper.
Well, how
to
bad
do
has it been, right? So meaning you're right. There's no other industry where it's done, but the facts are they'd have to go report to their constituents, right? And if they voted themselves a ludicrous increase, probably they would not get reelected. And again, if we look at it, right, what are their? I don't know what their exact salaries are, but I don't think it's astronomical. Do we have actual data?
What do congressmen and senators get? About 150, 200?
So to me, that's the right number. I don't want them making too little because then then they need to take these bribes, right? So if you have another system that's better, I'm open to it.
Well,
but
Jackie Mason always said we should put them on commission. If they perform well, and we would say if they keep spending in line, or if they do proper things, they get a commission. You have to define what they get commission for.
okay, so it looks like they're average
174,000 for both senators and.
sounds about right.
100,
Like
yeah.
to be honest, I think they should make more.
Yeah.
So
Well, maybe you should be on a committee to instead of.
no, really,
I would
think
like
about
to-
it, right? We don't look at the medical profession. Doctors used to make the most money, and therefore our best and brightest became doctors. That's really not the case anymore. So, don't we want our best and brightest to be doctors? I think 174 is reasonable. I think in previous podcasts you've mentioned an idea which I thought was great. Where we want people that don't need the public funds and don't they're there to serve. They're not using it to transport themselves into a different strata of wealth than they've had. So I think you mentioned
But they do.
Right.
They do. Every one of them, almost without exception, becomes a lobbyist after they leave, or goes to work for some company that they helped during their tenure. They vote good things for these companies, and then the companies hire them. It's not a quid pro quo going in, or supposedly not, but they do it. Even the people at the FDA all are motivated to respond well to the biggest pharmaceutical and biotech companies, because almost all of them, when they leave the FDA, join these companies at big prices, at big salaries, or they're engaged to give lectures that give them big rewards. So, we have a society that is motivated by money and income, and even sadly, all of industry. We've evolved to the point where they're motivated simply by profits. But Milton Friedman said that the obligation of corporations is to make the most money for their shareholders, not worry about the environment, not worried about oil spills or chemicals that are dangerous to the population, that leaks into their water, or so many different things that are what things that pollute the air and give people asthma, and there's no limitation, and interestingly, there's a basic conflict, almost, I never thought of this, but in a sense, Karl Marx had some merit, because there's an intrinsic, basic conflict between the owners of companies and their employees. Because for them to increase their profits the most is to keep the salaries as low as possible, to cut the salaries, to let people go as fast as they could, so they could have lower expenses, and also to avoid complying with laws that hurt their income.
Yeah, so here's where I'll push back a little bit. Karl Marx has probably had the worst idea
I didn't say Karl Marx. I'm not endorsing Karl Marx. I'm certainly not endorsing communism, because it doesn't work.
Right.
Capitalism
It doesn't
is
work.
the best system. You need incentives.
And I would add
But
actually, if you want to make, like, on some level, you're not incentivized to pay your employees as little as possible, because there's cost in employee turnover, there's cost in the marketplace, right? So it's not just whether or not your employees can work for you, you're up against everybody else. And I would say, people living at the poverty line in America today live a much better life and have the resources available to them than the wealthiest people in communist Russia or China do. So clearly that's played out. It's, free market capitalism is responsible for almost 100% of all the world's advancements over the last 200 years. Really. And any advancement that the non-free market capitalist states have gotten have been stolen. The ideas have come from here. So it doesn't mean free market capitalism is without its flaws. It doesn't mean people aren't being left behind. But it's the best system we have. Certainly Western
I don't argue with
liberal
that, and
democracies.
I shouldn't have brought up Marx. But the truth is, there's a basic natural conflict between what Milton Friedman urged corporations to do, to ignore everything but deliver the most profits to their shareholders, and that's like ignoring their obligations to their employees, to their community, to their country, I mean, it's really cold-hearted. I'm in favor of incentives, but the incentives should include incentives to make their society better, for us to be like a family, to encourage other members of society to do better. And I said there's a basic conflict. The tobacco companies didn't even want to give up cigarettes when their own kids were smoking.
And that's, look, you're 100% right, and that's where the government needs to step in. That's why we don't have a purely free market economy, right? There's these network externalities where pollution is not paid for, right? It is profitable to be a pollutant, and therefore the government's got to step in, which it has. And the markets also have their own mechanism, right? Like Philip Morris should have been catastrophically sued for all they're worth for killing people, right? So I don't know what their settlement was, how many $1 billion, it wasn't enough.
It was billions of dollars.
It was billions of dollars, it still wasn't enough, right? How do you put a price tag on a human life?
They made a lot of lawyers billionaires who had never thought about becoming billionaires.
But I want to go back to something else you spoke to, and I think that's really at the core of this, right? The whole lobbyist industry Or, you know, I was listening to a podcast recently. There's a podcast called All In. It's a bunch of Silicon Valley guys, but they're also political. They're smart. It's like one of the top 20 podcasts in the world, so it's slightly behind your podcast in in viewership. But they had on a political
It's
challenger.
the quality of my listeners. It's not the quantity.
So
We'll get the quantity going. I haven't advertised it. I haven't spent any money to promote it. So
it's grassroots right now.
yeah,
But they had a candidate on, a leading challenger for Biden on the Democratic side, a guy by the name of RFK Jr. Are you familiar with him at all?
yeah.
Yeah, so his uncle was president, assassinated. His father was president, assassinated. And he highlighted...
His father wasn't president.
No, his father was running for...
the attorney general.
Yeah, he was. He had just won the California primary
Yeah.
when he was assassinated. But he really highlighted what you were saying about, you know, not quite a deep state, but the way the incentives are for long-term people at the FDA, at these regulatory, government regulatory agencies to work hand in hand with big pharma and big companies and promote the big business. And that's not what they're doing. That's not what they should be doing. They should be working on behalf of the American people. And the whole concept of a lobbyist itself, right? The whole concept of lobbying is a way of putting money in front of people, right? Like your politician doesn't need help doing something good for the people, right? The lobbyist's job is to help him remember not to do good for people, right? To do good for business. And I don't have a particular solution, but I think step one to the solution is identifying this problem, right? And if we could somehow realign our elected officials to be fully transparent on everything they vote on and to kind of get real data from their constituents about what's important, right? So what we have right now is 51% democracy. That means someone gets elected and for the next 4 years he gets to vote, right? Now what you really want is someone like pure democracy, not that everything should be put to the vote by all the people, right? But that there should be some dialogue, some communication, some, like you said, some yearly review. And it's not just, okay, you're in office, do your thing, and all you got to worry about is getting reelected next 4 years.
Presumably, when we elect our representatives, whether to the House or the Senate, we're under the impression that they're going to dialogue, they're going to debate, they're going to, bring rational arguments to arrive at a good solution for the benefit of all the people. The trouble is, we're not a democracy, we're an autocracy, because the guy who pays, the donors who pay, and the lobbyists who are paid by these wealthy guys are there to resist and eliminate. One of the major things they do is try to eliminate regulations that protect the people, to help companies make more money. That's the reason the companies pay so much, so they could do things that increase their profits. It's very, very sad. It's supposed to be life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It's life, liberty. It's evolved to life, liberty, and the pursuit of ever larger GDP, and even more important, ever larger profits. That's what it's come to. It's not what the people want, because we have issues where there's 70, 80% not demand, but polls that show what people want, and it's not even ever brought up, much less voted to be implemented.
So what if you could speak to 1, 2, or 3 practical steps that would solve this particular issue, what would you suggest?
Well, let me show you how difficult it is. There's something called ESG. What does it stand for? Social, government.
Sustainability and governance.
What's the E stand for? not environment,
Equality?
not equality, no. ESG, which is to make society, hopefully, to improve society's behavior or to be
Environmental, social, and corporate governance.
environmental, social, and corporate government. So there are a number of activists that have adopted this ESG to make the United States a better country. Better is defined by people's values, but I think it's really to make it a better country. So a number of funds, including the largest fund in the world, BlackRock, which manages more money than any other company, any other fund, and a guy Fink is the head of it, has introduced that as part of their, they won't buy companies that hurt the environment, that hurt people, and so they haven't bought any oil companies. In fact, they've disposed of all their oil holdings. And there are other companies, a group of them. And last year, oil shot up like from minus 40 over the year and a quarter. They paid you $40 to take it, or less than zero, to over $100 a barrel. So it was the most rewarding segment of the stock market last year. So a lot of the holders of those shares in those companies said, it's not your role to worry about the environment. It's your role to make us the most money. And that included people that are always for the teachers union that has money with them, or a lot of unions that have money with them. It shows you how
Yeah, you can't teach
motivated.
values.
No,
Right?
you can't touch people's
You can't teach an old dog
money.
nature.
No, you can't touch their income or their potential income. So one year it'll be bad, and then right away they want it eliminated. They've beat up on Frank terribly. How could you do that? It's not your business to. It's your business to make the most money, whatever you invest in.
Yeah,
If you got to invest,
I will say this.
If you got to invest in cigarettes and what is it called, the vaping?
Have you ever read?
Vaping?
Have you ever read Rockefeller's biography?
No.
John D. Rockefeller was pretty much the wealthiest guy ever. So the first, it's a 700-page book. The first 400 pages are about how he is the nastiest businessman ever. Basically put everyone else in the world at it.
The Naziest or
Nasty.
the nastiest?
Nasty. No, Ford was a Nazi. Basically put everyone else on the planet out of business. Ran a trust. Okay. Now, he ends up at the turn of the century, like 1900, he has no idea what to do with his money. So he's giving away $50 million at a clip, $50 million, not adjusted for today's terms, like that.
Yes.
And to the point where he created basically medical science as we know it. Like he started all the medical schools and the institution. It was just a bunch of witch doctors before him. My point with all of this is
it's hard to get a good witch doctor these days.
you want to know his temperament and his core values was not good at all, right? Literally, by the way, sorry, he was a God-fearing man, no vices, was very good in that regard. But in terms of how he conducted his business ethics, would do anything for a dollar. But amazingly, despite his miserly, internal metrics, the world has benefited from him in no small manner. To the point where, it's insane what he accomplished for the world. And basically all his son did all day was give away money. $500 million between 1900 and 1910, right? So here's the interesting thing. When individual people get phenomenally wealthy, they tend to do a lot of good with it. Not even if they're bad guys. They just what are you going to do with $50 million, right? You're going to donate stuff.
Some of them have been well-intentioned.
Corporations.
Carnegie likewise did a lot of great things.
Yeah. But corporations have your Milton Friedman problem, right? There's never enough for the corporation. It's always growing more and more and more and more and more in shareholders, right? So, there's like this issue where when individuals are think about Bill Gates, all the amazing stuff he's done for the world. He has the Gates Foundation. He doesn't just have the Gates Foundation. He's convinced like a bunch of other billionaires to devote the majority of their money to saving the world in an intelligent way, right? But now think about Microsoft, right? They're not giving anything away. So there's this corporations, I don't want to say they're corrupt by nature, but like you said, they're the motor that the motor that fuels their engine is profit, 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 more profit. What do you do with it? Much more profit? Look to get invested and get more profit, right? So that's this dichotomy. Whereas people, the more money they get, it tends, no matter how bad that person is, right? They tend to do good things with their money. Like it's very hard to find, other than possibly Steve Jobs, who is known for not giving any charity. It's really hard to find a billionaire that doesn't give a tremendous amount of charity. It's an interesting.
It's interesting that you say that because what's his name, Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, one of the best investments ever. He's done 19-point-some% compounded for the last 40 years or something. You double your money at 19% every, what is it, 19?
Every 3.5 years.
Yeah, every 3.5 years you double your money. Can you imagine what if you put $10,000 in, or even $1,000 in?
Yeah, and think about the math. So with Buffett, right? If you think he's worth how many billion now? Okay.
He's given away.
And he's given a ton.
Hundreds of billion to the Gates Foundation. A guy got up to the microphone and made a speech. Yeah. How terrible he was. He gave money to the Gates Foundation. The damage they do. They had to carry him off the stage, throw him out.
Yeah, someone will have a problem with what you do, no matter what you're doing, right?
I forgot what his main issue was, whether he supports pedophiles or what, woke, a lot of cancel culture.
I think we have another topic to discuss today, and that's a debt ceiling, right?
Yeah, there's people that fix ceilings. They should call them in and let them.
Get a roofer?
Yeah, a roofer. They make such a big deal out of a problem with the ceiling.
I think they could use a roofie more than a roofer.
To me, that's not an issue, and it's just something that's totally wrong. McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, is the head of the Speaker of the House, and he's using this issue as it's been used a couple of times in the last 2 decades, maybe, or the last decade. It's only, I think it's the last 2 decades, to stop the government, to jeopardize the government's reputation. Its bonds were marked down by S&P and the other rating agencies because it stopped paying its bills at one time. But it's being used as a, what is it called, a cuddle? Not a cuddle, like a stick or something, a weapon to achieve political goals. And that's okay. You should fight for your political goals, but don't use a kind of blackmail where you're going to stop the government and you jeopardize the whole country and its credibility, its credit rating, and that's what he's doing now. Because the money that is owed, that they want to pay, was a result of expenditures that both parties approved. Otherwise, they couldn't have. Congress has to approve all expenditures, and it has to be done by a majority vote. So it was all voted on, and it was spent, but the money wasn't paid. People take the government's promise to pay. So now the time has come to pay, and Kevin McCarthy is saying...
Oh, but he's tying it to the budget, right? So
He's tying it to the budget, but the budget has not, they spent that.
Well, so
what do you mean?
how,
If you have a budget for
But-
what you're gonna spend, and you spend it on your credit card,
That's not-
and then you spend it, and then the time comes to pay it, you decide you're not gonna pay it.
well,
You can't decide not to pay it when you
Absolutely,
agreed to,
but they do need, right, so they do need to come, this problem is created by last year's budget, right? And what's being proposed to him is to raise the debt ceiling and to have this be the budget, right? So
They're
let's just
not-
frame the,
they're not proposing that, they're proposing that we won't approve to pay what was spent. And the thing, they have every right to say, after this, we should set up a new budget that doesn't get us into this issue. You want to cut, as they do, they want to cut so many, they proposed something. They said, oh, look, the Republicans put up a program to cut Social Security, to cut Medicare, to cut so many things. It's only under duress, under blackmail that they could get their way on issues like this. So it's absolutely wrong. They have to approve it. Biden shouldn't compromise one iota. It's not something to discuss. You owe the money, pay it. That's not
you
something.
should compromise it all in the budget.
On a future budget, you compromise whatever
But
you
they
want.
go hand in hand. From
Every
my
year,
understanding-
they decide what to spend.
But-
So decide not to spend more than you
But
have. It's-
from
you
what I
gotta take in.
understand, they propose the budget and then they raise the debt ceiling, right, to fund both the debt and the budget. So
They raise,
this is the time,
They-
right? Like,
no, they raise-
from what I understand,
they have to raise the ceiling so they could pay their bills. That's what it is. It's not anything to do.
but it goes along with the proposed budget.
No, the proposed budget comes up after the new year. But before they spend any more money, they could decide, we're not going to have a budget that exceeds the debt limit.
So let me ask you what's the process of the budget? Comes up before the new year, and then what? What if they're split on the budget?
It's negotiated. It's
And
arrived at.
what if the president
If
refuses
they
to negotiate?
decide, the president doesn't decide the budget, the Congress does.
Okay, but what if they're deadlocked, right? So from what I understand, this is a lever that could be pulled, right, to balance that budget.
They do whatever they can, but that doesn't mean that they have a right to arrive at their budget. If the budget is arrived at by agreement between the parties.
I don't think the U.S. should default on its debt, but I do think fiscal responsibility is one of the greatest problems.
So deal with that, but don't deal with it in retrospect. After you spend the money, you can't say, we're not going to pay the bills.
No,
That's what McCarthy is saying.
No, what
We're not
McCarthy's
going to
saying-
give you the wherewithal to pay the bills. The Secretary of Treasury says that's going to be a disaster.
It will.
It jeopardizes our
But that's not
standing
what
in the whole
McCarthy's saying.
world.
McCarthy's saying is you want to pay the bills. Now's the time that you actually need my vote, right? But the second I give you that vote, you're going to do whatever you want on the budget.
No,
So
the budget comes up again and now. You want to deal with the budget after your bills are paid, deal with the budget. If you don't pay your American Express,
yeah.
you're not entitled to do that. You could decide next year, you talk to your wife, your kids, we're not spending this on this, we're not spending on that, that's the new budget. You don't deal with next year's budget after you've spent this year's money. You can't do that. That's not the way life is.
So let me just ask you this.
If they refuse to increase the ceiling, it's going to be a disaster. There's Powell of the Federal Reserve says it. What's her name at the Secretary of Treasury says
Yeah.
it. All like economists, without exception, say you can't not pay that bill.
Yeah, and I agree that they shouldn't default on their debt. But I am asking, what is the way to deal with the
I told you.
national debt?
I told you.
No, what
It's
is the
just
debt
like
to get fiscally responsible?
you and your family decide not to pay this. You can't decide not
But
to
the
pay.
fact is, it's
You
gotten
just-
out of hand.
No, so it's gotten out of hand. Now we sit down and you gotta impose on your wife, or she says, screw you, we're gonna spend it. And then you have to pay it. If your wife and you are forced to agree to a higher expenditure, then whatever you spend, you're gonna have to pay. And if you don't agree on it, if you agree to stay within the parameters of what money you can earn, then that's the budget. Then you don't have to raise the ceiling. You don't use bribery or blackmail or this kind of leverage to get what you want. That's like a little kid laying down on the floor and fainting to induce his mother to give him something that he wants. You can't do that.
No, I think all's fair in love and politics.
No, it's not fair because you can't. It's not right to jeopardize the nation, our nation, reputation and credit rating and everything. Because
But
you want
think
something.
about how the credit itself, right? So debt is now 1.3 times GDP, around 1.35. It's at an all-time high.
Yeah.
By the way, the cost of debt, anything that's coming due, right? We're now looking at interest rates,
Well,
3.5%.
That was the
higher.
stupidity of the government. I wrote a book and I was urging, but the pandemic came up, so I never had it published. But I was advocating, and they could have sold tons of bonds at 1% yield, 50-year bonds, 100-year bonds at 1% yields, at 2% yields, and then they wouldn't be in this situation where now they're going to have to pay 6%. So any projections about the future deficit were way out the window because they were using 2%.
So what is the answer here, right? So just debt service alone on 31 trillion, right?
Yeah, it's
At,
going to. It's a
at
major.
5% is 1.5 trillion.
It's a major part of the budget.
And what's GDP right now? Do we know?
About 22 million, 23.
Okay, so it's about
23 trillion.
So about 7-8% of GDP is just going straight to debt service at today's levels.
Yeah, between debt service and defense spending, it's maybe at least a quarter of the budget, a quarter of what we spend, maybe more.
So what is the path forward? Do you think it's austerity? Do you think it's higher taxes?
Well, usually when you get into that situation, it's suicide.
Right. So every other country that's
But the government can't commit suicide, so we have to figure out something else. I'm not worried about the deficit. You know why? We could never go bankrupt because we print our own money. And secondly, inflation takes care of it. Because after the Second World War, we had approximately a little less than this relationship of debt to GDP. And we paid it all off ultimately because what do you call it? It's nominal, it's fixed. When you sell $1,000 bond to government, it has to pay $1,000 back 20 years later. But in the meantime, with inflation,
right,
they're paying back way less because now salaries have gone up, taxes have gone up, and so forth. So that takes care of it. It'll get taken care of.
Yeah, I think the dirty little secret is that we actually need the inflation, right? We need the lower interest rate, but we need the lower interest rates and we need the inflation on a government
level. We should
level.
have 2-3% inflation all the time. Nobody's saying zero inflation is good. And deflation certainly is not good.
Well, basically, you need inflation to be higher than the interest rate, right? Higher than the debt service to inflate the debt away. That's the math. That's the math here.
No, over the years, you don't need.
You need the long-term inflation rate to be higher than the long-term interest we're paying.
At some
because
juncture.
Because the debt grows at the interest rate.
No, not necessarily. If you start to reduce your debt, you rein in your debt, you rein in your expenditures. If you reduce your deficits, then it disappears. Between inflation and reducing your deficit. Look, Clinton is the only guy in the last 200 years, I think the only time that we had a surplus. Milton Friedman even said, what are we going to do? We won't have to issue any more bonds. Oh my God, it's a disaster. It's where will people put their money for safety? You need U.S. treasuries. You need U.S. notes. I mean, he was out of his mind because anytime you think that the government won't spend more than it takes in and they won't need to borrow money is ridiculous. Okay, we have 10 minutes to go. I'm notified.
Do we have any questions from last week or any listener comments that we want to discuss?
I want to discuss guns every week because we don't have we just increase the number and the incidents of mass killings, and all they talk about, the governor of Texas says, yeah, we need to deal with mental issues. It's like a distraction. The NRA uses that too, mental issues, as if that's going to solve it. And why anybody needs, why any civilian just when?
There's just in the 200th mass shooting.
Oh, 200, yeah, that's not even 200 days yet this year.
200th of the year.
So what is that, how many days are there so far? January, February, March, April.
July 20th would be
120.
200 days.
What? No, but till the end of January, February, it's about 130 days. So 200, so it's almost 1.5, it's 1.5 a day. I don't know how do you have half a mass shooting? No, 1.5, and it's defined as at least 4 people getting shot.
Yeah.
Not 4 people getting killed.
This doesn't make for a good discussion because I agree with you 100%. So
how come it doesn't get done?
it's mind-boggling. It is mind-boggling.
How come the NRA, the National Rifle Association, has such power? And the Second Amendment, the Second Amendment is so holy. It can't be dealt with. It can't be modified.
It's so
every constitutional issue. I was just explaining to Len. The number one issue in the Constitution is free speech, right? So that shows how important it is. It's number one, right? But it's not absolute, because think of it this way. Tucker Carlson was just thrown off Fox. He wants to do free speech, so he's gone on Twitter and he makes speeches. And Fox is going to cut him off, saying he doesn't have the right to do that because he's still under contract to them. They pay him $20 million a year. If they keep paying his contract, he doesn't have free speech. So it's not, anything in the Constitution is subject to conditions, to circumstances.
This is a little sometimes misunderstood. The right to free speech is the right to not have the government stop you from free speech. Now, if you sign a contract with Fox, you do not have free speech, right? And if you're 7 years old and you're sitting at the Shabbos table and you're eating your dad's food, you also probably do not have the right to free speech. Although my kids certainly haven't figured that out.
It shows that it's not
universal and ubiquitous.
That anything in the Constitution is not absolute. So gun control, gun availability. First of all, it's so confusing because it says a well-armed militia. Why would it preface it by saying a well-armed militia? It should say, if this was in their intention, every man is entitled to have a gun.
Here's where I lose my mind. Okay, I'll be talking to the
AR-215 to be what?
Right. So let's speak to that. Right.
Wants it to be what?
George Santos, our congressman.
Oh yeah, you're mine and your congressman. I'm sad to say. Has proposed that the
who's
AR-15
now like a year into Congress and has not actually had one thing about his bio turned out to be true?
No, you're right. He said his mother was
Is his
part
name
of-
actually George?
His mother, I don't even know if that's his name. His mother, he says his mother was a victim of the Holocaust. It's never been there. It's never. He said he worked at Goldman Sachs and he went to City College. Today he was indicted. He was
Really?
arrested in Mineola.
Here's what I've seen.
And what's his name? Kevin McCarthy says, well, he won't let him go because every man is innocent until proven guilty.
It's just become identity, right? Like, when I speak to people in this neighborhood about gun control, and they support the positions of the NRA, like, it's mind-boggling to me, just because they happen to be aligned on a different issue, right? The fact that people have just completely outsourced their brains, and they cannot think of an issue independent of another issue. If the Democrats like this, then I have to hate it. Why? Like, you hate kids? Like, you want kids being shot in school? On what planet does any value that we have, or any normal human being have, align with mass shootings, right? So if there is data out of Australia where they got rid of all guns and they don't have mass shootings,
It's not the only country. A
right?
lot of them.
But, like, why not try it, right? like, hey, I'm sure you could give me 100 reasons for mass shootings, but how about we just try this experiment of getting rid of the guns? How about we get rid of the AR-15, right? Do you really need an AR-15 to defend your house from the person who can also get the AR-15 if you don't ban it?
Do you need it for hunting? It's outrageous.
Yeah.
As it is, the animal has no shot, and the whole idea, the fun of hunting, is there's a chance you'll miss, and it's interesting, in Jewish law, you're not allowed to hunt. And it's because of consideration that you might shoot the animal and not kill him, and that you're creating so much suffering. It's just for fun.
There is actually a tshuva, a responsa from the Noda B'Yehuda, Rabbi Cheskel Landau of Prague. He was the preeminent scholar in his generation, where he was asked, am I allowed to hunt? Is it what we call tsar balei chayim, painting an animal? And he says, no, painting an animal is only if you don't kill it. So he goes, technically you might be allowed to, but he goes, why would you want to hunt? Yeah. Like, why would you want to go do this to an animal?
If it's to feed yourself,
sure, absolutely,
then you're allowed, but not for fun.
Yeah, it is really hard to wrap your head.
Look, I have the problem. I have 4 son-in-laws. One of them decided to buy a gun. I tell them, get rid of it. You're only increasing your chance of getting killed, because if a criminal came into my house and I found him, I would be the nicest guy in the world. I'd give him anything he wants as quick as he wants just to get him out. I pointed out that a girl who was in bed recently, an African-American girl, was killed while she was in bed by police. So how did that happen? So it only happened, and it would have never happened. Apparently the police went into the wrong house, and they opened the door, and they started to go in, and her boyfriend was in bed with her. So her boyfriend started to shoot at the police. So they returned fire, and they killed the girl in bed. If he didn't start shooting, they wouldn't have shot, then she'd be alive. You just increase you're raising the ante.
Well,
you're raising the ante. You're not, even the police who are trained and everything, hardly ever hit their
the data is around training, right? So if you
That's
do
it.
own a gun, you definitely should have training. But
No,
I'm
but
not
I'm
even
saying,
necessarily.
they say for protection. But you know what they announced when they had 47 people killed in the theater in Colorado? They said a man, the only way to stop a man with a gun is to have another man with a gun. It's a good man with a gun. So if everybody in that theater had a gun, this guy would have been killed quickly. Yeah, you know what the truth is? If everybody took out their guns in the theater, First of all, they would never know exactly who shot whom, who the original shooter was, and there probably would have been 100 people killed before. You know, it's like the reopening the Wild West. You know, we're going to shoot. It's dramatic. You pull out your two guns and fire. All right, it's been great. Time is up. Thank you very much, Ephraim.
Thank you all.
It's always great to have you on.
Good to see
You're
you.
brilliant, you're charming, you're personable, and sometimes
Not
you're
particularly good at tennis.
Sometimes you're even agreeable. Okay.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you for coming from